Hey everybody, and welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching the Battle of Ilerda by Historia Civilis. Last time we saw Caesar finally march on Rome. The Pompeians decided to flee the city, and it's now Caesar who has taken over the Italian peninsula versus two forces of Pompeians in Spain and Greece. Caesar has decided to go for his enemies in Spain first. We're going to see how that goes in this video. I'm excited to get into this. We've finally reached the Roman Civil War. This is some pretty good stuff. If you guys end up enjoying this video, I'd appreciate it if you would check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. And without any further ado, let's jump into this reaction. Always with the great music.
By spring of the year 49 BCE, Julius Caesar, with Italy under his control, faced the possibility of fighting a war on multiple fronts. Presently, Pompey was busy assembling an army in Greece, which meant that he had to leave his legions in Spain to fend for themselves. These 7 Spanish legions posed an immediate threat to Caesar. After sending 3 of his legions to North Africa via Sicily and 1 to Sardinia, Caesar departed Italy with 3 legions.
And last time we talked about Caesar's logic, he had a bunch of legions to face in Spain versus Pompey was organizing a new army out in Greece. Now, Caesar knew the longer he left Pompey alone, the more organized he would become, and the more capable he would become of putting up a fight against Caesar. But Caesar's concern was that those legions in Spain right now, they're ready to go. They could just march over to the Italian peninsula and take me out. So he thought, I'm going to go for Spain first. Tough position to be in. You've got enemies on 2 fronts. There's pros and cons either way, but he decided to go for the immediate threat in Spain, which will allow Pompey more time to organize and get ready. We'll see how it goes.
He would rendezvous with 6 more legions from Gaul once he got to Spain. As Caesar and his legions traveled to Spain, one of the major cities along the way, named Massilia, declared neutrality and refused to aid Caesar's legions until this whole civil war thing was sorted out.
Well, okay. Well, I see a fire starting to appear, so that doesn't seem good, but it's a rather interesting strategy for a civil war. Usually, the local politicians in each city or whoever's in charge will choose a side, usually whatever is most beneficial to their safety. Of course, that can be difficult sometimes. Choosing neutrality is the third option, the road less traveled. It seems like it may not turn out well for them, considering they have Caesar marching right through their area. I would probably just say, yeah, I'm totally with you, man, and then you could reconsider afterwards. Uh-oh.
Pretty soon, it became clear that Domitius Ahenobarbus, the guy that Caesar had pardoned for unsuccessfully blocking his approach to Rome, was leading the defense of the city.
Ah, well, never mind. Now I know exactly why they did that. Domitius has come back. Last time we saw him get... well, he didn't get whooped by Caesar. His men basically mutinied and gave up before the battle had started. I mean, he didn't stand a chance. Caesar would have destroyed him. But in a rare act of generosity, Caesar gave Domitius a pardon, which I think was a very good idea, because it shows that, Caesar's recognizing that he's fighting his fellow Romans, and he's saying, look, I know that I've been pretty brutal in the past, but I'm going to be generous. You guys are my countrymen. I don't want to alienate you. I want to bring you together. Domitius was not interested, and Historia Civilis sort of mentioned last time that he would be coming back, and here he is. He's popped up to try and stop Caesar again. And I mean, we know he won't stop Caesar. I guess what we have to see is how badly he's going to fail.
Domitius Ahenobarbus couldn't have planned this better if he tried. A long, drawn-out siege would take months. Caesar didn't have time for that. He had to wrap things up in Spain before Pompey had a chance to raise an army in Greece.
This
The clock
is true.
was ticking.
Okay, but and this seems like, hey, maybe Domitius has the right idea, but it seemed like that last time until the battle actually started, and then his men just gave up instantly. So it does seem like Domitius might have the right idea, but I'm not quite sure it's going to go the way he expects. I guess we'll see. Maybe he'll have some minor success.
At the same time, Caesar didn't want to just ignore a rebel city. As we know, the situation in Gaul remained precarious.
Yeah.
Success breeds success, and if he let this situation fester, things could easily spiral into another Gallic uprising. He didn't
Very
have time
true.
for that either.
Yeah, I mean, Caesar is handling a civil war amongst the Romans. Of course, that very much risks the Gauls seeing what's happening and thinking, now is our chance to rise up. I mean, we have fallen under the domination of Caesar over the last couple years due to his military success over us. But if the Gauls see an opportunity to rise up again, maybe they'd take it. Maybe they'd figure this is their chance for independence. I mean, they've been beaten many times before, but this is a very chaotic situation. So Caesar has to get all this wrapped up quickly and really reestablish his control over the western part of the Roman Empire. That's his immediate goal. And then he can turn and face Pompey in the east, which is his secondary but still extremely important goal.
Caesar decided to take a risk. He would leave these 3 legions behind and proceed to Spain alone.
Interesting.
Instead of facing Pompey's 7 Spanish legions with 9 of his own, he would face them with 6.
Ooh.
As Caesar and his bodyguards made their way towards Spain.
You know, we've seen in these last couple of episodes, Caesar is making a lot of quick snap decisions that, you know, there is no ideal outcome on either way. These are probably some of the more difficult situations Caesar has encountered. You know, he's facing a tough enemy. Really, none of the options he's being presented with, and each choice he makes are that good. It's more the lesser of 2 bad decisions, and Caesar has to make these decisions quickly. Now, so far, he's been successful, but, you know, it doesn't take much in a situation like this to get overwhelmed. One, you know, bad stumble could be the end for Caesar if he's unable to recover.
His 6 legions from Gaul successfully occupied all the important passes through the Pyrenees Mountains. With Caesar still weeks away, they began to inch their way into Spain.
Okay, here we go.
Before too long, they encountered the Pompeian army. They were sitting on a fantastic defensive position. The Pompeians were encamped high up on a ridge. The town of Ilerda, just behind them, controlled access to the only bridge across the river. There were also mountains to the south. If the Caesarians crossed the river, they would be stuck between a hill, a river, and some mountains.
Yep, I mean, they knew Caesar was coming. This has given the Pompeians in Spain the opportunity to choose the battleground. You know, they have been able to choose their own defensive position, so of course, Caesar is arriving already at a disadvantage. Not to mention that he's only bringing 6 of the planned 9 legions. So, you know, this might be a difficult situation.
Supply across the river would be extremely difficult, and with bottlenecks in every direction, escape would be nearly impossible. If Caesar decided to attack, he would be attacking uphill. If he decided to wait, the Pompeians could cut his supply lines. If he decided to retreat, the Pompeians could stop him at any of the bottlenecks. It wasn't all good news for the Pompeians, though. Of the 7 legions in Spain, only 5 had been able to get there in time. The other 2 legions were dealing with stuff hundreds of kilometers away. So the Caesarian legions outnumbered the Pompeian legions 6-5. But bear in mind that most of the Caesarian legions were at half strength, which meant that in the end, the Pompeians probably had a slight numerical advantage.
Interesting. You know, it seems we're going back and forth. It's initially, well, Caesar couldn't bring his 9 legions, he only brought 6. But then, you know, the Pompeians, they actually only have 5 legions in that region, but they actually probably still outnumber Caesar. So, but it seems like they may have forces that are fairly equivalent. It doesn't seem like either side massively outnumbers the other.
When Caesar's legions arrived, the legate in charge ordered 2 new bridges built, and within a few days, the entire group had crossed the river into that terrible position between the hill, the river, and the mountains. This was exactly what the Pompeians wanted them to do, so they just sat back and watched. The Caesarians decided to settle in and wait. This would strain their supply lines, and both sides knew this. The Caesarians sent foraging parties far and wide to reduce the strain, and the Pompeians sent patrols to challenge them. Then, something weird happened. One day, when the Caesarians were foraging on the other side of the river, one of the bridges just collapsed. With the Caesarians unexpectedly cut off, the Pompeians responded quickly by sending all of their cavalry across their bridge.
Oh.
This was a total disaster. The stranded Caesarians didn't stand a chance against that many Pompeians.
One, I'm surprised. Roman craftsmanship is usually, pretty impressive. And two, this is not a good way to start out the Civil War for Caesar. I mean, of course, he's managed to conquer Rome and the Italian peninsula. I mean, Pompey didn't put up a fight, he just fled. So that's a bit of a morale boost, I suppose. But what we know and what he knows is that this is where the fighting really begins. This is sort of a bad omen to start things off on.
Back at the Caesarian camp, they hatched a pretty risky plan to save their stranded units. A small detachment of infantry was sent out on its own, marching 6 kilometers north at a breakneck pace and crossing the second bridge.
Wow.
On the other side of the river, they caught sight of the stranded Caesarians, making a last stand. The infantry were protecting the cavalry in a defensive square, with their javelins pointing outward like spears.
Smart.
The Pompeian cavalry were...
I mean, hey, this is Roman infantry. Not to mention, this is Caesar's infantry. These are well-trained, experienced veterans. Even in a seemingly hopeless situation like this, they know exactly what to do.
Were charging over and over again, but each time the Caesarian infantry held their ground. When the exhausted Caesarian reinforcements showed up, the Pompeian cavalry turned and fled.
Nice.
Neither side suffered very many casualties, but because of the Caesarian infantry, total disaster was averted.
Yeah, it actually didn't end up being as bad. I mean, it looks like we were going to get a terrible start for Caesar, but due to the training of his men and the quick relief effort, it actually ended up okay.
The next day, the Caesarians got to work repairing the collapsed bridge, and it was at that moment when Caesar decided to show up.
There he
could
is.
Immediately see that with the Pompeians up on that ridge, and the Caesarians operating under time constraints, the current situation was kinda unwinnable. This should serve as a reminder that apart from Labienus, Caesar's subordinates had never been particularly skilled militarily.
Yeah, I mean, we've really seen that in order to succeed, in order for Caesar's forces to succeed, he really has to be there personally commanding them, unless he had Labienus there in his stead. Of course, now Labienus, he's gone. He is left for the other side of the conflict, and so, Caesar, he really has to actually be there managing things himself.
Caesar would need to shake things up quickly. He ordered half a legion to stay behind and protect the bridges, and then repositioned the rest of his men uncomfortably close to the Pompeians, right at the foot of the hill, as if he were begging them to attack. Both sides deployed for battle, but the Pompeians didn't take the bait. If Caesar wanted a fight, he would have to attack uphill.
Smart. I mean, they've chosen their defensive position. They know they're secure. So, I mean, they do not want to get carried away and fall straight into Caesar's trap. So, very smart. Just hold steady. That's all they have to do.
As the sun began to set, Caesar decided that he wasn't going to give up this little toehold halfway up the hill. His first 2 lines remained ready to fight, while the third line pulled back and began to dig a giant defensive trench. This would serve as the foundation for a new Caesarian camp. The Caesarians continued like this all night. The Pompeians were oblivious. The next day, continuing on absolutely no sleep, the 3rd Caesarian line dug another set of trenches, extending away from the hill. When the Caesarians started putting up walls, the Pompeians finally figured out what they were doing. They sent skirmishers forward to disrupt the construction, but it was much too late for that.
Oh, yeah. This is Caesar we're talking about. He's acted decisively. He's looked at the available options, and he said, I don't like any of those. I'm going to take my own way. And of course, since it's the Romans and since it's Caesar, his option that he's created involves construction, as the Roman army was known for.
The Caesarians easily pushed them back, and by the following day, the Caesarians had completed the construction of their fortified camp, right there on the hill. Both armies found it quite stressful sleeping with the enemy so close at hand.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure.
that was the whole point. Now that the temperature was turned up, maybe the Pompeians would make a foolish mistake.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, of course. Caesar's also putting his own men under a lot of pressure, but at this time, Pompey's forces, well, these Pompeians right here, they have all the advantages, and Caesar has to try and circumvent that. So any extra pressure or stress he can put on them, could be a massive advantage to him if he can manage to seize on any mistakes that they may make.
The next day, Caesar led half of his legions out of the new camp. He marched around the Pompeian position and up a tiny hill between the Pompeians and the town of Ilerda. This was an extremely bold move. The Pompeians scrambled and were able to beat the Caesarians to the top of the hill.
Damn.
Now, the Caesarians were attacking uphill, which was exactly what they had been trying to avoid the whole time.
Not great.
As the two armies clashed, both sides sent for reinforcements. Throughout the day, the fighting escalated and intensified, with neither side making any progress. There were heavy casualties. When it was all done, the Caesarians had lost 700 men, and the Pompeians had lost only 200. More importantly,
unsurprisingly, considering Caesar ended up attacking uphill, which is what he wanted to avoid, his losses are far more substantial.
the Caesarians had failed to capture the hill.
Not good.
Clearly, this had been a massive miscalculation on Caesar's part. He tried to put a good spin on it, but there's no denying that he had sent his men into a meat grinder.
Yeah, the initial idea wasn't bad, but the Pompeians managed to beat him to the top of the hill and then put up a good fight. So this is definitely an L for Caesar, I would say. The battle is going mixed so far. I'd say mixed to bad. The Pompeians still have their initial advantage, and the one major skirmish they've gotten into was far more detrimental to the Caesarians.
One possible explanation for Caesar's failure here is that he was used to fighting Gauls, and Gauls usually got tired after a couple hours of fighting. Roman legions knew how to pace themselves and fight all day.
That's
Plus,
true.
These Pompeian legions in particular had cut their teeth campaigning against the Spanish hill tribes.
Yeah, he's not, we've seen some pretty ferocious Gauls, so no disrespect to the Gauls, but Caesar was fighting his fellow Romans, and these are some experienced veteran Roman soldiers. They've got the training, they've got the experience, they've got the cohesion, the ability to stand steady, so he might have to reconsider how exactly he goes about things.
Caesar had underestimated his enemy. Fortunately for Caesar, he had some Gallic reinforcements and supply wagons coming his way. In light of his recent defeat, he was going to need them. But now, Caesar's luck decided to run out. It began to rain relentlessly for days on end. Hostilities ground to a halt, and the Gallic reinforcements were forced to stop and find shelter. And the bad luck didn't stop there. As the days went by, the river swelled until eventually it washed away both of the Caesarian bridges. Now, the only way across the river was the bridge at Ilerda, which...
Yeah, I would say Caesar, like most great men throughout history, is a very lucky man. He is very lucky. We've seen that many times, but this is an instance where he's been hit with a stroke of bad luck. That's unfortunate for him. It's really messing with his plans.
was under Pompeian control. Whenever the Caesarian reinforcements arrived, they would be sitting ducks for the Pompeian cavalry. Caesar immediately sent out repair crews, but the water was too high, and most of the building materials had washed away. Nothing could be done. Without resupply, his legions would run out of food in a matter of days. He cut rations down to basically nothing, and began racking his brain to fix this mess.
He's gonna have to, work something out. But considering the position he's in, there's probably no one else I would rather have there than Caesar. If anybody could work something out, it would be him. But I guess we'll see what he does.
In time, he thought of something. Under the cover of darkness, he sent one of his legions a full day's march up the river. By sunrise, they hid themselves behind a hill and began constructing a new, secret bridge.
Okay.
A short time later, the bridge was finished, and the Gallic reinforcements arrived. Before the Pompeians could react, the legion crossed the bridge and escorted them back across the river, all the way back to the Caesarian camp. With a full legion protecting the Gauls, the Pompeians didn't see an opportunity to attack. Caesar's legions were reinforced and resupplied. Crisis averted.
A simple but effective solution. Your bridges have been destroyed, move further up the river, find a better spot, build another bridge. It's pretty simple stuff, but like I said, effective, it works.
Now, Caesar had a cavalry advantage, and he began to use this advantage to really turn the screws on the Pompeians. The Caesarians successfully intercepted a bunch of the Pompeian foraging parties.
Caesar is, he's doing good tactics, good strategy. He is also playing some mind games with them, putting the pressure on, forcing them to hopefully make a mistake, really stressing them out.
And now the Pompeians were forced to cut rations. Caesar's hand had undeniably been strengthened. Some nearby towns could see the writing on the wall and decided to openly declare for the Caesarians, promising to supply them with food going forward. With this development, the Pompeians unexpectedly had to deal with much tougher supply lines. After some deliberation, they decided to play it safe and pull back into friendlier territory. This was a smart thing to do, by the way. The Pompeians had time on their side, so why not pull back and prolong this thing for as long as possible?
True.
That night, the Pompeians crossed their bridge. And
it's kind of tough that the battle didn't go their way, considering their initial advantages. They would probably hope to have performed a lot better than this, but Historia Civilis is right. Time is on their side, so no harm in retreating to fight another day.
And began the process of withdrawing to the mountains in the south. Caesar was alerted to their movement and had his cavalry swim across the river to harass them and slow them down. When the sun rose, the Pompeians were way off in the distance, fighting a rearguard action against Caesar's cavalry. The Caesarians used some engineering wizardry to lower the water levels so that they could wade across the river on foot.
Wow.
This took all day, and frankly, it would have been faster to cross at one of the bridges to the north, but I guess they were afraid of losing sight of the Pompeians. By the time the
once again, Roman engineering comes into the picture. You're not having a true ancient Roman battle unless some sort of construction or engineering plays a major role. In this battle, it's played a major role multiple times. And of course it's Caesar, so he's gonna try and chase after the Pompeians, which is definitely the right move. If he can manage to catch them and beat them here, that would be fantastic for him.
Crossing was complete, the sun was setting, and each army encamped for the night. The next day, each army sent patrols south to find viable passes through the mountains. Each side found what they were looking for. Whichever army occupied these passes would be able to hold them indefinitely against the enemy.
Yep.
The Caesarians set out before dawn, marching away at an odd angle. The Pompeians were like, what are they doing? And thought that maybe they were withdrawing. Abruptly, the Caesarians turned and made a mad dash for the mountains. The Pompeians immediately realized...
I was gonna say, the Pompeians have the lead. If Caesar wants to reach these mountains first, he's gonna have to do something different. and his strategy was just totally to psych out the Pompeians, just fake them out. Another simple, but still surprising strategy. A bit of a, maybe not a feigned retreat, but confuse them. Maybe suggest that you might be retreating, then quickly snap, turn around, and just run for the mountains.
Realized what was happening and turned to do the same. It was now a race to see which side could reach the mountains first. Caesar sent his Gallic cavalry to attack the Pompeians and slow them down.
Smart.
It worked. The Caesarians just barely made it to the mountains first. The Pompeian escape was cut off.
Yeah, they're in trouble now.
Over the next several days, each side built fortifications and sent expeditions to the river to secure access to drinking water. And then, far from the prying eyes of their commanding officers, the two sides began to talk to each other. People started asking after family members serving in the other army.
Oh, this is fascinating. And not too surprising, I guess. We always have to remember, always have to bring it back to the fact that it is a civil war. So it's going to be different than a war with a foreign power. These fellas, many of them might know each other. They might be related. They might know, this guy's cousin or that guy's friend back in Rome. I think of like the American Civil War and the taunting between the Yankees and the rebels. Some pretty personal stuff going back and forth, but that was also brothers against brothers. We have a similar situation here. These guys know each other, and of course in the American Civil War they fought it out till the end, but there is an opportunity in a situation like this for men on one side to go to the other side, or for the men to come together. It usually doesn't happen, but you can't discount that possibility. We have to think differently when it's a civil war. And Caesar already has been thinking differently. He's tried to be more magnanimous than he usually is with hostile civilian populations. He's usually a pretty brutal operator, but he's tried to be a lot more friendly with Roman cities, towns, and civilians. So it's just interesting to keep that in mind when thinking about this conflict.
And the conversations grew from there. After several days of this, somebody finally figured out that everybody was just standing by the river chatting when they were supposed to be fighting.
Yeah.
The Pompeians charged with their cavalry, and most of the Caesarian soldiers fled back to their camp. Apparently, a bunch of Caesarians failed to escape, and the Pompeians saved their lives by disguising them and hiding them in their camp until nightfall.
Shout out.
Both sides were starting to discover that civil wars are awful. They didn't want to fight each other anymore. This was a serious problem for both armies, but Caesar decided to lean into it to see.
I'm curious to see where this goes, but this is exactly what I would expect him to do. Now, this is a problem. For both armies, the commanders want to fight each other, right? It's a war. Caesar is fighting for his interests, and Pompey is fighting for his interests. Or he would say the interests of the Republic, I'm sure. Now, if your men stop wanting to fight each other, that's an issue. You're not going to be able to get what you want. But, and it seems like Caesar might do this, if you can manage to lean into that, if you can sort of take advantage of the fact that your men know each other, or they don't want to fight the other side or whatever, if you can manage to bring some of the Pompeians over, or, convince them to be neutral or whatever, then, you could take this issue and put it in your advantage instead of your disadvantage. And Caesar's a smart guy. He's always looking for, how to turn things in his favor. So I'm not surprised that he would try and make this good for him.
If he could turn it to his advantage. He sent word to the Pompeian soldiers, saying that they could come and go from his camp as they pleased, and if they felt like maybe sticking around and joining up with his army, nobody was going to stop them.
Very smart.
The Pompeians realized that if they didn't leave now, they were at risk of a mass desertion.
Yep.
They made a break for it, striking north. The Caesarians followed, harassing them with their cavalry the entire way. The Pompeians tried to head back across the bridge to Ilerda, but the Caesarians blocked them. Caesar had the cavalry advantage. They couldn't outrun him. They were trapped. Pompey's Spanish legions saw no other choice. They surrendered to Caesar.
Yeah, and I mean, it's crazy to think back to the beginning of this battle. They had all the advantages. It was the Caesarians who were trapped in a bad position, and now Caesar, he managed to force them off of their position. He managed to occupy the mountains before they could get there, trap them. He can chase them to and fro. They have nowhere to go. I mean, they could fight it out and probably lose, or they can give up. And considering there's already been some, fraternization between the two sides, they're probably better just giving up. I'm sure a lot of men from the Pompeians would desert to the Caesarians, and maybe about to if they get the option.
Caesar gave the ex-Pompeian soldiers permission to go home, and they were happy to do so.
Wow.
The 2 remaining legions...
That's an even better deal. He didn't even conscript them to work in his army. He said, you know what, y'all can just go home. And I'm sure they were very grateful for that offer. I'm sure some of them were loyal to the cause, but a lot of them, they're just regular foot soldiers who've been caught up in this civil war that's way above their pay grade. Many of them probably just would rather not be involved.
in the Spanish hinterlands quickly surrendered as well.
Wow. Impressive.
The Battle of Ilerda is really interesting. The only time the 2 armies actually clashed, the Pompeians won, and yet somehow Caesar emerged victorious.
Yeah, no, that's very true, but that's the thing about Caesar. He's tricky, we've seen this the whole time, and I always say this, I've said it in this video, the impressive thing about Caesar is he always finds another option. If fighting head-on is not favorable, he's not going to do it. Sometimes he makes mistakes, of course. Sometimes he will do things that are not in his interest, but generally, his excellence comes from the fact that, he's tricky. He'll always do things his own way, and we can really see that here.
As we saw, it had a lot to do with positioning and logistics and mind games. It was a weird way to win a victory. And with that victory, Caesar was able to take control of Spain and wipe Pompey's most experienced legions off the map.
Nice.
There was also some happy news from Transalpine Gaul. The siege of Massilia was
Domitius.
over, and the Caesarians had captured the city. However, in the confusion, Domitius Ahenobarbus had managed to escape on a ship.
Again?
This was the 2nd time that he had thrown a wrench into Caesar's plans, and this time he was pretty successful. He'd be back.
Yeah. Wow. Domitius he's on a mission. Him individually, he keeps coming back despite Caesar. First time was a complete failure. This time seems to have been a minor success. Maybe not too important in the grand scheme, but he managed to hold Caesar's legions up, and he got away with his life. So I'm very curious to see how he comes back a 3rd time.
After a rocky start to the Civil War, things were looking up for Caesar. Kinda. Gaul remained stable. Spain was now under his control, and things were fine in Italy. But those good vibes didn't last.
Yeah.
As soon as Caesar consolidated power in Spain, a bunch of bad news arrived at once.
Uh-oh.
Caesar's legate had successfully captured Sicily with 3 legions, and had continued on to North Africa as instructed. However, after some initial success, the legions were ambushed by Pompey's ally, the king of Numidia, and defeated. Caesar's legate died fighting, and the majority of that army was captured and then executed.
Ooh.
2 full legions were lost.
Yeah, that's rough.
The bad news didn't stop there. Gaius Antonius, Mark Antony's brother, was in Illyricum commanding 1.5 legions, with instructions to capture some rebel towns and keep the Pompeians at arm's length. Gaius was pretty much immediately captured by the Pompeians, and his 1.5 legions enthusiastically agreed to switch sides.
Wow.
For the Caesarians, the whole thing was a humiliating setback.
But, this is a lot of bad news to get at once. I'm sure you'd feel pretty demoralized after hearing that. But, Caesar knew this going in to the conflict with the Spanish Pompeians. This was the issue the whole time. He knew that if he went to fight the Pompeians in Spain, he'd be leaving the rest of his territory vulnerable. So while this is, I mean, it's not good at all for Caesar, I'm sure Pompey's been taking this time to get more organized. This is what Caesar knew was going to happen. He really had no choice. So, it is what it is, basically.
The weather was beginning to turn, so Caesar divided up his legions and made plans to return to Rome for the winter. But he was in for one more wave of bad news.
Uh-oh.
When Caesar's 9th Legion arrived in Transalpine Gaul, they mutinied. This was a shock to everybody. This legion had served under Caesar for a solid decade, and only a few months earlier had helped Caesar conquer Spain with no issues. The thing is, their tour of duty was up. Caesar knew this, and had promised them...
I mean, we talked last time about how Caesar had already been paying his men with IOUs. So, he owes them. They've been serving him for a long time, and he hasn't paid up yet. So, I can see why they'd be frustrated. And, pulling something like this is often the best way to get what you want if you can manage to get some leverage, which I would say they do have here, given, the civil war that's going on.
A hefty bonus if they agreed to stay on until the end of the Civil War. They had reluctantly agreed to do so, but Caesar was low on funds again and had failed to pay them. This was all compounded by the fact that they were not that keen on fighting their fellow Romans.
Fair.
The 9th Legion was not unique. Most of Caesar's legions were pretty old and approaching retirement. If the 9th Legion got away with this, others might follow suit.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Caesar's got a lot of experienced veterans, which is great in terms of their ability to win battles, but some of them are getting old. They're nearing retirement. I'm not saying they're like super old, but for a soldier, you age pretty quickly. That's pretty tough in your physical health. So many of these guys want to, get their piece of land, get paid, settle down, and live out their retirement in comfort. So, this could definitely be difficult. Not to mention, we talked about the character of a civil war. They don't really want to fight their fellow Romans, and they're fighting, for the upstart. Pompey is the one who, at least, I mean, he has the better claim to the title of Defender of the Republic. The Senate fled with him. He's the one who is defending the Republic against Caesar. Whoever you prefer, Caesar or Pompey, that's not what this is about. But Caesar is definitely the upstart in this situation. He's the one who is overturning tradition, basically overturning the government. So, some of these men might feel a certain type of way about that, even if they're not too political.
Caesar could potentially lose half of his legions overnight.
Yeah.
He went to Transalpine Gaul and personally spoke to the soldiers, saying, "I want this war to end as quickly as possible, just like you." He reminded them how his victories in Gaul had made them all rich, and accused them of abandoning him when he needed them most. This guilt trip worked. Caesar then threatened to decimate the legion, which would mean the execution of every 10th soldier. The men begged him to reconsider, which he did. In the end, 12 of the ringleaders were executed, and the 9th Legion was returned to the fold.
Caesar went for a bit of a stick and carrot approach. He gave them the carrot. He said, "Look, I've made you all rich before. I want this war to end as quickly as possible. I'm going to lead you to victory." And also the stick, which is, or, if you want to keep this mutiny up, I could decimate this legion. I could execute a bunch of you. I would say stick and carrot, probably a good way to go. I would not have gone too hard against them, because you don't want to risk, alienating your own troops. But I can see why he doesn't want to just give in. He's already making promises he can't keep. He doesn't want to accelerate that process. So he sort of takes a middle road, which appears to have worked.
More importantly, no other legions mutinied. Labienus's defection had clearly created a gap that had not yet been filled. Wherever Caesar was, he was capable of putting out fires, but wherever he wasn't, like North Africa and Illyricum and Transalpine Gaul, things were falling apart.
And this had already been a problem with Caesar, but now he's not just fighting for Gaul, he's fighting for the entire empire, and it's a lot more difficult to micromanage a civil war for the entire empire. So, he would be well served to find some talented subordinates who can, keep things running while he's gone.
Caesar needed a new second in command. Mark Antony was extremely loyal, but he was an inexperienced commander and was developing into an unsubtle and unpopular politician.
Yep.
He had overseen Italy competently enough in Caesar's absence, but it remained unclear how he would handle a true crisis. He was no Labienus, that's for sure. With his victory in Spain, Caesar had momentum, but his conquests were beginning to fray at the edges, and it would only be a matter of time before his luck ran out. In the coming year, Caesar would have to land a knockout punch against Pompey.
All right. That was a really good one. This has been some really fascinating and entertaining stuff. Seeing, Caesar's journey throughout his career, his march on Rome, the start of the Civil War. This is some really good stuff. I'm really enjoying it. If you guys liked this video, I'd appreciate it if you would leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I will see you guys again next time. Goodbye.